Hello, I'm Steve Ryder and welcome back to Racing Weekly, a podcast and YouTube show with Oddschecker in association with Bet365. I'm stepping in for Rishi Persad this week. Obviously we've got Sam Turner over on the far side as always.
Steve.
Sam, how are you?
Yeah, good form, thanks, yeah. After a bit of a dull weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah, lots to discuss later on.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously joined by Tracey. Kate, how are you?
Oh, I'm really well, thank you. Yeah, great to be here. So thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. We kind of just said, obviously everyone kind of knows you from at the races and a few obviously other platforms, but I hadn't quite realised how actually into horses and riding and looking after that you're actually into.
Yeah, that's the foundation really for me, because I'm not from any equine or racing background whatsoever. I just fell in love with the sport from a very young age and I was just determined this was going to be my life. And so I literally sort of learnt on the job with horses, went to the British Racing School, got into racing through that way, and my grounding was very much being a groom for Philip Hobbs for 5 years, and then fortunately that's sort of lended me then to other avenues within the sport, and eventually it's led to getting into the media side.
Yeah, and I understand you were like integral at looking after Fingal Bay back in the day.
Oh, but good research. Yes, he was my pet. Yeah, Fingal Bay, still the best day of my life when he won the Thames final at the Cheltenham Festival. It was just incredible. He was my absolute darling.
Yeah, there we go. Right, lots to discuss on the show, and it leads me nicely into racing recap. Okay, so there's only one place to start, obviously, on this show, and it's the Grand National itself. So, Sam, Corach Rambler, impressive winner. Obviously, Lucinda Russell and Peter Scudamore, who we had on the show last week. Great story, great performance in the end.
Yeah, I think it even brought a tear to a glass eye, didn't it, over the weekend. I must admit, I felt quite emotional watching the race for a number of reasons, but yeah, predominantly, it was great to have Peter Scudamore on the show last week, and of course they came on last year as well, so we've had the pair of them on a bit, and we featured Corach Rambler a fair bit as well. So it was an absolutely fabulous performance. It was what I couldn't believe really. There was no drama surrounding the performance at all, despite there being absolute chaos and a frenetic afternoon really culminating in the Grand National. But the way that he just moved serenely through the race, lay up with a strong pace, jumped beautifully, and just went wherever Derek wanted him to go, really. Brilliant for Derek Fox as well. Obviously, he passed up a number of rides through the week, which were all great chances. He could have won Grade 1s on a Hoy Signor, Apple Away, but he was firm in his mind that he was just going to get right for the Grand National, and that was a really, really shrewd move in the end, but a very brave one too. And mentally, that must have taken a lot of discipline from him really to make sure that his shoulder was absolutely A1 going into the National, to give him the best chance of winning a National on Corach Rambler, and being able to forsake rides in bumpers and all sorts of other races. So fair play to Derek as well, two-time Grand National winning jockey. I mean, there's not many people who can say that. No,
definitely not. It's like you said, there was no drama at all. Not often you look back at a replay and you go, oh, he nearly got brought down there, or oh, he's made a mistake there, but it literally just went completely to plan. Raced a lot more prominently than I actually thought he would.
He lay up, didn't he? And I thought, you watched him on the first circuit and the way that he was sort of travelling just in behind the speed, you thought, crikey, if this lad gets round, he's a certainty really, isn't he? Because you know how he's going to finish. His engine was probably superior to virtually every horse in the race. And the way that he's been prepared as well, to win twice at the Cheltenham Festival back to back. He's 3 from 3 at Cheltenham. Perhaps we'll touch on the fact that later on he might become a viable Gold Cup candidate, really, given his course form and the way that, because he pulls himself up in front. I mean, he was having a good look at the crowd, wasn't he, on Saturday, and having his picture taken, pretty much crossing the line. The fact that he copes with everything so well, and that the atmosphere of those races, the different rigours that they require as well, I think he's going to be a viable Gold Cup horse. I really do. I think 25-33 to 1 is I think that's a really tasty prize.
Yeah, I think they've kind of blown their handicap mark now, haven't
they? Exactly,
I don't think he'll be heading back to the Ultimate next year. Anyway.
Well, no, I think he'll be conditions races, which might not see the best of him, but you might as well go for a Gold Cup, mightn't you? When you look down the list of runners that are ahead of him in the market, none of them probably love Cheltenham as much as he does. And as I say, the way that he pulls himself up means that we don't quite know how good he could be. And I thought Derek was brilliant on him on Saturday.
Yeah, he could. The way that he jumped the last going ahead, you kind of didn't want to hit the front that soon, but he had absolutely no choice, and like you said, with having the picture taken. Kate, your thoughts on the performance and maybe some of the beaten horses in behind?
Yeah, as Sam was saying, the ride was just exemplary because Derek Fox, I mean, he's one of those jockeys where he wouldn't be the most stylish, I'd say the term would probably be agricultural more than anything in terms of the style of his jockeyship, but that also means he comes with an awful lot of horsemanship as well. And you don't win 2 Grand Nationals by pure fluke. There's a reason that Scoo and Lucinda Russell adore him. And there's a lot of yards that probably wouldn't want to use Derek Fox, though, because of his unique style. But he is just the ultimate horseman. We saw it, I know we're going to discuss a Hoist Senior later on, but we've seen it with a Hoist Senior, though. He is not an easy ride. And for all it was no disrespect at all to Brian Hughes then, who got a great tune out of the horse, but I think it was more of a reflection of just how good Derek Fox is. And he showed it again on Corach Rambler. He's not straightforward. As soon as he hit the front, his head came up as we tend to expect. Yet Derek Fox, who knows him so well, knew how much he had in reserve, knew exactly how to time that run as well, so he could get the best out of Corach Rambler throughout it. I agree with you where my fear about this horse and the price that he went off at was his dropping out running style. For all that nowadays in the Grand National, we know that horses rarely actually make call. It's not the National of old. You saw with Lashes when a Noble Yates, he came from off of the pace. But I still just had the fear he was going to get 2 behind the bridle and he was going to drop off of them. But he was ridden far more prominently, and he just didn't make a mistake the entire way around. You never see that. Like I say, never had any sort of moments worry about him whatsoever, which is just bizarre, but he was so impressive. We knew he had £10 in hand beforehand, so he is going to have to step up in grade and outer handicaps going forwards. And when you see the likes of Hewick and such like running such a big race for a long way in the Gold Cup, you wouldn't be too dismissive of a horse of Corach Rambler's standing in a Gold Cup. But no, he was just wonderful. Vanillier, he ran a wonderful race. That kissing spine operation he had has obviously worked the oracle then for him jumping wise. So I thought that was a wonderful ride, wonderful run. Many people would argue with the ride probably. He took up the Corach Rambler role of dropping probably a bit too far out of his ground. But I just have a fear he's going to fill the any second now position for the next few years in the Grand National, where he's going to get a hike in the weights. But yeah, the best ride of the race, so behind Corach Rambler, Noble Yates, Sean Bowen, the way he was behind and off the bridle to come there running was fair play to Sean Bowen for knowing that horse so well.
Yeah, definitely. And Gard de Menil was kind of ridden in the same kind of way as Vanillier as well, stayed on at the end. I know Paul Tanner was struggling a bit with injury. I think it's come out against it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's going to have a few days off because obviously the fall of Dark Raven.
Yeah, that took its toll, didn't it? I thought that was a brilliant ride, actually, because I don't think at one point did Gallop de Menil really relish the fences at Aintree. It just didn't seem to jump with any smoothness, any enthusiasm. It was just all a bit laboured, and somehow Paul managed to get him into the race with a chance. And he was on the inside, and he switched wide, and probably when he came out a little bit, he probably saw a bit more light and took to his task a bit more. But it was a hell of an engine, Gallop de Menil, to even do what he managed to do. When you look at the way Corach Rambler jumped, and you look at the way that Gallop de Menil jumped, it was remarkable that he finished third.
Talking of enthusiasm for the fences, I mean, Cocoa Beach, absolutely, it gave Harry Cobden a great ride. Mr. Coffee as well for Nico de Boinville. Stamina was always the question mark with him, wasn't it? So even when he was at the front, kind of a couple out, you kind of thought whether you were actually going to get home. But no, some really nice performances. Obviously, we'll discuss other parts of the race later in Talking Topics. But yeah, the race on the whole, really good performance from Corach Rambler. We then go back in time, head back to Thursday for a few of the action from there. Manifesto Novices Chase, you had Banbridge staying on well to beat Samoa by 1.5 lengths. He's now 14-1 for the Ryanair Chase at the Cheltenham Festival next year with Bet365. Sam, I know when we did Racing Weekly Live, our Cheltenham preview, you napped him in the Turners. Obviously, he was a non-runner on the ground. Did you keep the faith?
The rain came. I did have a little bit on him, but I tipped Saint Bois. Because I thought the ground would be probably too soft again for Banbridge. But then, one or two of the judges walked the track before racing on Thursday. They came back. I mean, there was a lad that I was chatting to in the press room. He wore suede shoes and went round there, and there wasn't a drop of water on the shoes. They came back, they were absolutely mint. So I thought, I've got to better back Banbridge then, just in case. And all the money came from him as well, so I presume that was for people who had actually bothered to walk the track, unlike myself. And he put up a really good performance, didn't he? He did what Banbridge does. He travelled well, jumped well. And he looks a tailor-made horse for something like the Ryanair next year, doesn't he? Providing the ground is decent.
Yeah, looking at the quotes afterwards, I don't think it's a 2.5 mile race at Punchestown, so they're talking about dropping him to 2 miles for Punchestown.
I don't think he'll go to Punchestown. Just speaking to somebody in the yard, I think, you know, perhaps the owner was a bit keener than Joseph to go to Punchestown, and there was also a little bit of a feeling that he's better left-handed, so that might just play into your thoughts if you're thinking about King George's and races like that. So I think he's done his job, and I think he might be off for a bit of summer break now.
Yeah, Stage Star was obviously slightly disappointing. That Turners hasn't worked out too well so far. Obviously appreciate it, and James de Burley didn't do it much favours at Fairy House either. No,
and like you say, that's the concern. But I mean, I took that result of the Turners in isolation anyway. Of course, we lost some of the allure then with Banbridge being a late defection from the race because of the soft ground. But Stage Star, I'm not really a fan of Progeny of Fame and Glory over fences. Generally, they don't make the most natural of jumpers. He is the one anomaly, though, throughout that, because we saw it at Cheltenham. The rhythm he can get into on the front end, he's just a wonderful jumper. And you see it when the horse lands. His head doesn't move, it stays incredibly level, hence why he's as safe as he is. But at Aintree, he just made a couple of sticky errors, and that to me was more reflective of the fact that he was running flat more so than anything. But what I took out of that mainly from Sam is that you don't need a going stick nowadays, you just need a pair of suede shoes to
That's it, absolutely, yeah, you can keep your going stick.
Definitely. Aintree Bowl next, Shishkin. It didn't look likely at one stage, did it? Obviously, we touched on a hoist, and wasn't the easiest to ride for Brian Hughes. Made mistakes all the way round.
Yeah.
Jumped right. Nico was kind of didn't know where to go, was trying to go up his inside. It was really fascinating watching the race back from the overhead camera.
Yeah. I think Kate touched on a good point with Derek Fox. Yeah, he's not John Francombe, and perhaps Nico isn't John Francombe, you know, within the style and smoothness of riding or whatever. But what you do get is you get brilliant horsemanship, and his last two rides on Shishkin, I think, have been incredible. To get him into second in the Ryanair chase was some effort for a horse that I don't know whether he was sporting mental scars from the 12 months ago in the Champion Chase, which obviously left a bad taste for him, but he just never went a yard, did he, in the Ryanair? And he was a bit on and off here as well, and looking for all the world as if he's needed all of the 3 miles and a furlong. I was a bit heartbroken, to be honest, for Hoy Senior. He's such a big lad, he just can't fiddle, can he? He's got his way of getting from A to B. Brian came in for a bit of criticism, but I thought that was off the mark, really, because if anyone's seen a Hoy Senior jump in any of his previous chases, you'll know that some days you are going to have a day where he's just not going to see everything on a stride, and he was a bit unlucky to tip up at Cheltenham. I thought that was a bit more of a clumsy mistake rather than a bad one, just knuckled on landing at the top of the hill. But, you know, he got round, and I thought he got the race in safekeeping, and to be fair to Shishkin, you know, he's an incredible horse, really, hasn't he? How he's had the pace or the ability to win over 2 and then look for all the world as though 3 miles of the Betfair Bowl he needs every yard of it.
Yeah.
So a brilliant job from the stable to get him back. I've just got my reservations if he goes to Cheltenham for a third year off the back of what he's been through there. I don't know whether there is something mental with the horse. You know, he seemed a lot happier at Aintree, the Liverpool air, touch of the Merseyside sights and scenes rather than Cheltenham. So I just have my reservations about a Gold Cup glory for him.
Yeah, 12-1 with Bet365 for the Gold Cup next year. 5-1 for the King George. Would you fancy him?
I fancy him more for the King George, but Brave Man's Game, though, a horse that I have underestimated. I'm willing to put my hands up about that time and time again. I've tried to take him on everywhere, and I've been foolish to do so, because the King George, though, at least he's going to have the live contender, because I think that will suit Shishkin an awful lot better, for all that it will be going back right-handed again there with his jumping out to the left that we've seen at Ascot and such like. But in terms of the Gold Cup, I'm in agreement with Sam, where I wonder now about Cheltenham for him. But he's done this whole sort of, this character build around Shishkin's been fascinating, because at the start of his career, he was this superstar that no one could get beaten. He was the greatest thing we've ever seen. Then he had the rare bone condition. He was lost in the wilderness for a fair amount of time, and now all of a sudden he's come back, and he's this character of a horse. You know, he's got his own mind. He wears his heart on his sleeve. We saw him at Cheltenham. He ran a blinder, considering he was going there and he was racing begrudgingly. He did it. He didn't actually want to go a yard, yet his talent got him through. But here he was a different animal the whole way through it. So we know our fate with Shishkin from quite an early stage, probably even in the preliminaries, but it wouldn't quite be the Gold Cup candidate. I want to side about that price.
He looked like a 13-year-old being taken for a shoe fitting, didn't he? At Cheltenham?
Yeah.
He was just like,
Yeah.
come on, we've got to go. And that was it. You had, like Nico, was having to pull him and drag him over every fence, basically. I wonder whether a bit of headgear wouldn't, give Nico a bit of help, but whether they'd ever go down that road. Nicky would probably say I'm talking absolute rubbish, as usual, but it just might get him just to travel a little bit.
They waited long enough for Altior to put some headgear on him, didn't they? So, like you say, they might just wait a while yet, but...
Yeah. Fascinating ITV race, and Ruby's in agreement with you about headgear. It was interesting around the preliminaries because Luke Harvey did an interesting piece down at the start, and you could tell that he was a bit more revved up at the start. Was keen going to post, so he's definitely one that you probably wouldn't back before you've seen him down at the start in his future races. Really, to see if he's on a going day. A couple of the beaten horses, obviously conflated, kind of had probably the Cheltenham as an excuse. A Plutard, what are our kind of thoughts on him going forward?
Oh, he's very tricky. Yeah, it's very tricky, isn't it, with him, because he ran such a huge race in the Gold Cup last season, but ever since then he has not looked like the same horse in any sort of way. I know that in Cheltenham he travelled with more zest, but he was hampered very significantly, hence why he pulled up. So even if you were forgiving of that, to come back to Aintree again, I thought, okay, coming down, and when they turned into home straight, I thought, right, we've got him back here. This is where he's going to be seen to the fore. But all of a sudden his stride just shortened and he tied up again then to an extent. So I would be very surprised if we saw that level of performance from the Gold Cup ever again from him.
He had a good setup the other day, didn't he? They went a million up front. There was plenty of pace, collapsed late on as Shishkin proved, and he still couldn't just lay up with them, and that's not the Plutard that we know, is he?
Unfortunately not. Last performance on the Thursday to look at, Constitution Hill, obviously winning the Aintree hurdle as expected. Kate, fences or hurdles next year? Thoughts?
I do want to see him over a fence. If I'm thinking of heart as much as anything else, it was just a little bit of a shame that it felt that Nicky Henderson was almost backtracking on that slightly in his post-race interviews, though, where you thought, okay, well, everything going forwards, and with Michael Buckley being as forthright as he is and as ambitious as he is, and I wish we had more owners like Michael Buckley, he's wonderful, isn't he? Then you kind of thought, right, fences, we're all onto that, and we're going to just get a brilliant novice chase division then for the 2 milers next year. But I wonder if they might be tempted to stick over hurdles. But the scope he has, the brain he has, the bravery he has, he's going to be an absolute thrill even to school over fences.
Definitely. Nico obviously touched on the next couple of weeks they'll school him over a fence. If you watch Michael Buckley's in isolation, you think definitely going over fences. If you watch Nicky Henderson's interview in isolation, he's definitely staying over hurdles. He even outlined the plan, didn't he? Christmas hurdle, international hurdle, and you kind of went, okay.
I'd like to see him stay over hurdles. I don't understand the clamour to go over fences with some of these quality hurdlers. I really don't. I think, okay, it might be a bit of a procession for him, but so be it. See you then 1-3 on the bounce. And I know he was a fragile horse, so they probably didn't want to go over fences with him. But Nicky's just trained so many good champion hurdle horses that I don't see why you need to have a rush to go over. You've got John Bon, hasn't he? If the ground's good, 2 mile races next year. Obviously Constitution Hill, will go through a novice campaign first, but I'm not that certain why the rush is to go over fences, really. And I'm not also certain whether he is going to be a true Gold Cup horse. I think he's got so much speed, this horse, that I'm not sure 3 1/4 there is going to be ideal for him. So keep him over hurdles. I know there'll be rather uncompetitive betting heats, but there's probably about 15,000 other races we can all have a bet on. So I don't think we'll go short.
No, he also hurdles really well. You had horses like Faheen that never really jumped like a champion hurdler, whereas he definitely does. He's so quick and nimble. Obviously his last in the champion hurdler at Cheltenham kind of proved for that.
The only thing I'd say is the speed figure was incredibly slow. So everybody looked as though they were riding for second, basically, like Charger and Epatante, and nobody went to take him on. And pretty much it was a lap and a half of a parade, if I'm honest. Yeah. I think we do need some competition. Hopefully the likes of Marine National doesn't go over fences. He can be a live champion hurdle contender next year.
I think there's going to be a lot of those connections, seeing what Constitution Hill does before they decide whether to stick over hurdles or whether they go over fences next season. Just for viewers, 7-4 favourite for the Arca with Bet365 or 4-6 favourite for the champion hurdle Bet365 next year. Interesting side note, Charger, they may do a Faheen and go over fences, go novice chasing with him, according to Rich Ritchie.
Which would be fascinating, like I say, for an older horse now. But he's quite a diminutive horse. He wouldn't be the biggest, but he is the most professional horse I think I've ever seen. His attitude, he's the most laid-back character you'd ever meet. So in terms of taking him to a different code, you wouldn't have any fear from a mental point of view that he'd struggle with that. And he is, touch wood, a very good jumper as well. We know he's got an occasional stepping him over hurdles, but I think that when he steps, it's more complacency than anything. So I wouldn't have much fear of him over fences, and we've seen these connections, as you say, doing it to optimal effect previously.
Yeah. Move on to a couple on Friday. Mild Main Novices Chase, Jerry Colon, justifying his short price, won easily at 4 to 6 really. Nice to see Davy Russell, Grade 1 winner, obviously had a couple at the meeting, kind of ended a lot better than what we did at the Cheltenham Festival.
Yeah, much more positive note, wasn't it, for Davy? Great for him to go out with a couple of Grade 1 wins, certainly in these colours as well. I thought Jerry Colon was one of the performances of the week, to be honest. Look at the time comparisons and the sectional times. They compared very favourably with Picdory and Fakir Duderie, despite running over further. I think that was much more the Jerry Colon that they know that they've got. Was he 8-1 now with Bet365 for the Gold Cup? Some have felt that was one that got away for him, the Novice Chase at Cheltenham. Perhaps he should have won that on another day, but the real whacker managed it. I think he's a horse very much going forward. I don't think we've seen quite how good he could be yet, and I think he's going to be a live candidate come March next year.
Yeah, definitely. That extra time, 2.5 furlongs from the Gold Cup, from the Brown Advisory, will definitely suit Jerry Colon next year.
Definitely. And that was kind of a concern going to Aintree, is that sort of the only stone you could really throw at him was that the track may not suit him potentially of Aintree, and whether or not that he was going to actually be able to get into that jumping rhythm, because we know how good his jumping is. There was no fear of that whatsoever. I know that Bron finished further behind him than he had at Cheltenham. He probably didn't give his running from that Cheltenham effort, and Gallia Delato obviously took it up quite a long way out, and that resulted in her own stablemate falling as well. But Jerry Colon, his jumping is just so wonderful, and he's the most laid-back character. So the extra emphasis on stamina. I mean, the Gold Cup that we have to look forward to next year, touch wood, if all these horses make it, is going to be something to behold, because I think the real whacker is a real one, and that was confirmed with Jerry Colon. And then with those two going to war there, if Shishkin goes there as well, then last year's winner, I mean, the Gold Cup already is looking wonderful.
Yeah, throw in Brave Man's Game, Corach, Rambler. You've got a good race, haven't you? Yeah. The thing I like about Jerry Colon is he's pretty bomb-proof, isn't he? He's jumped around Sandown really well, tricky track for novices. He's obviously jumped around Cheltenham very well. And I think there was a school of thought that felt that if the new whip rules hadn't come in, that his rider might have given him 1 or 2 more at Cheltenham, and he might just have got there. So, he's unlucky really to have probably lost his winning sequence there.
Yeah, ground no concerns either. He's done all sorts of ground. Like he's one from an anti-post perspective. You know where he's going to go, and you've got very little reservations about him going forward. Quickly on the top novices hurdle in the pocket one under Rachel Blackmore. Interestingly, obviously Henry de Bromhead and JP McManus obviously they combined for Manila times. That's his first Grade 1 winner for Henry.
Incredible.
JP McManus in that. We've discussed a couple of the Cheltenham Festival forms already. That Supreme looks strong, doesn't it? Obviously in the pocket finished 4th, Strong Leader finished 9th. They filled the 1-2. So Supreme once again looks a good race going forward. Yeah,
it does. And I was doubting in the pocket because they had him entered in the top novices over 2 miles, and they also had him in the 2 mile 4 contest as well. And going into Aintree, I really hoped that they were going to go up in trip with him. I thought he should have run in the Ballymore rather than the Supreme, but obviously Cheltenham's not really the place to be exploring a new trip for a novice hurdler at that stage anyway. So they went here, but I think that the rain did really help him on that basis. It was slower on the hurdle course and the chase track. And I think that extra emphasis on stamina in the conditions did really suit him. I don't agree with the steward's decision then, or what they said about Rachel Blackmore utilising her reins rather than the stick. I think that was just an unnecessary thing to pull her up on. But yeah, really, really solid race. And like I say, Strong Leader, who's probably the best looking horse I think I've ever seen. Honestly, in the paddock for the Supreme, I was leading up Il Était Temps, and I had Strong Leader in front of me, and I was just in awe. He's gorgeous. Can't wait to see him over a fence.
Yeah, handsome lad, isn't he?
Yeah, he really is.
Sam, anything to add on that race?
No, I just like the way that the winner travelled. Obviously, that was probably as close as Ollie Murphy's got to a Grade 1 win there for a while, hasn't it? I was taking Strong Leader. I thought he'd run a big race back at Aintree, just didn't fire at Cheltenham for whatever reason. So they've got a nice novice chaser to go to war with next year.
Yeah, definitely. Melling Chase, Picdory denied Fakir Duderie a hat-trick of wins in this race. Paul Nicholls has now won this a record 4 times. For Dalco in 2001, Masterminded and Politolog more recently. He's another that's kind of benefited from missing Cheltenham and being aimed purely at Aintree, isn't it, Kate?
Yeah, that's it. And again, all credit to Paul Nicholls for doing that. We know that he isn't a trainer where he thinks that Cheltenham is the be-all of end-all, and a lot of his horses, bizarrely, don't seem to suit Cheltenham as well as they do with certain flatter tracks, which is mind-blowing. When you see the gallop that he has at his home, you would have thought his horses would be tailor-made for that stiff finish, but a horse like Pic D'Orhy as well, where he's had his jumping issues in the past, as we know, the wind operation does seem to have really helped him because he's flown since then. Harry Cobden has said himself that if he just leaves him alone and trusts him, he actually jumps an awful lot better for him. But he's another horse where I feel like very often with Paul Nicholls' horses, we do underplay them and we try and take them on where possible. And I think that that's more of a compliment to Paul Nicholls than anything else. The fact that he manages to achieve these Grade 1 feats with horses that we don't necessarily think are quite that calibre of those Grade 1 types. So in a bizarre, counterproductive way, I actually think it's more of a credit to Paul Nicholls that he gets as much out of his horses with these targeting as he actually does.
Yeah, he is just the ultimate target trainer, isn't
He
he?
is.
Prize money and spotting a weak Grade 1, Grade 2 on the calendar.
Yeah, he's superb, and experience teaches you that, but obviously you've got to have the eye for it as well, and for those people who know Paul Nicholls know that the programme book is never far from his grasp, at any time of day or any time of night, to be honest. So, that's one thing that he would teach a lot of trainers, to do better really, is know that programme book inside out, because he's unbelievable at it. I wouldn't be surprised to see Fakir Dudery sort of taking on some ambitious targets next year. Wouldn't be surprised if you see him in the big one on the Saturday afternoon. It's just the kind of race, I think, that having had a Way for the Sea run so well, I think Joseph's appetite's been whetted a little bit by that, and I wouldn't be surprised to see whether he went that way, and it'd be fascinating to see him over the national fences, perhaps in a Beecher Chase and then perhaps a big one.
He looks like he wants to step up in trip now, doesn't
he?
He
doesn't he? He was
wasn't
just flat to the boards,
he was
isn't he?
flat out the whole way through.
Yeah, it was nice to see him back to somewhere near his form, because he had looked disappointing earlier on in the season.
Yeah, Ascot wasn't great, was he? He
No.
was in lane 12 and he was, just didn't fire for whatever reason there. But this was a lot better. As Kate said, Paul's done brilliantly. I mean, a 2-length defeat of Miller's Bank for Pic D'Orhy early on in the year, you're not thinking this is going to go and win a Grade 1 at Aintree, are you? But it's just how good he is.
Yeah, and moving on to the Saturday action, Mersey Novices Hurdle. Irish Point provided David Russell with his final Grade 1 winning success of his career. Like I touched on earlier, good to see him retiring in a bit better form than obviously Cheltenham, which was a bit of a disaster. Another horse that benefited, obviously missing from Cheltenham. 16-1 for the Turners Novices Chase next year with bet 365. Could obviously stay over hurdles, but yeah, I'd be inclined obviously to see him over a fence. Kate, your thoughts on the performance?
Oh, I love this horse. I absolutely adore him. He was one of the reasons why I wanted to side with Marine Nationale in the Supreme, where lots of people throughout the season were using Irish Point as a stick to beat Marine Nationale with, and I just thought, I think it's more of a compliment to Marine Nationale that Irish Point almost beat him in the Royal Bond. But for Marine Nationale having the pure class, they've managed to get up on that short enough run into the line. But he's such a straightforward character. He showed that in the Lawlers of Naas again, where they had the omitted hurdles, when he proved himself over that trip anyway. And then he went to Leopardstown, and they just gave him a really bizarre ride. They completely dropped him out. He was detached, never in contention. He thought,
Over 2 miles as well.
yeah, over 2 miles. It was just really bizarre. I'm not sure what the thinking really was there, because then when he ran on the Sunday prior to Cheltenham at Naas, it was a confidence-boosting performance. He made all, he jumped well, and you just thought, right, that's perfect now to be stepping back up in trip, to go to Aintree as a seemingly fresher horse, not in terms of the time, but just because he had a more feasible win to his name going into it. And he's just a wonderful, bonny little horse, isn't he? Trip versatile, jumps beautifully. I've not seen him in person. He doesn't look the biggest of horses, so that might just be something to bear in mind. But in terms of the technique he has, I don't have much issue on that with going over fences. But yeah, brilliant for Davey.
Yeah, Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, echo a lot of what Kate says, really. I think they've trained him pretty well from Leopardstown onwards. I think missing Cheltenham was a positive. As I say, went to Naas and they just got him back a little bit. His confidence was boosted. I think they just backed off him a little bit, listening to Davey's comments as well. Perhaps his form was just on the downward curve, but he certainly announced his class on Saturday. Really strong staying performance, jumped beautifully, got a lovely ride into the race, lovely toe into the race as well. I was taken with him. I thought Katira ran really well. Obviously, Dan Skelton's blown a good handicap mark with her, but I think that's almost a tip in itself when these stables, John Gosden does it on the flat a bit, prepared to wipe, what looks a very good handicap mark, in pursuit of really winning a Grade 1 or running very well in a Grade 1. I thought she was, I thought she was given a really good ride, and I thought she ran really well. I thought Hermes Allen was a perfectly sound run from him as well in a good competitive race.
Yeah, definitely. Last race we'll review in full is the Liverpool Hurdle. Cider Burley is just an incredible horse. Won the race for a second year in a row. Apparently touched 199 to 1 in running. Marie's Rock came there absolutely travelling. Cider Burley 16 to 1 with Bet365 to retain the Stayers Hurdle next year. He could go either two ways, couldn't he? He could not raise a leg for the whole season and go off 100s, or could
and win.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely bizarre. Kind of the Stayers division kind of needs a new poster boy, and I really didn't think it was going to be Cider Burley at the start of this year.
No, not at the age of 11.
No. It's
astonishing.
Incredible horse.
Mark Walsh is thinking about pulling him up after a lap. But what a phenomenal horse. And, if somebody had said to you at any point during that race that he was going to beat Florian Porter 10 lengths going away at the line, you'd have just thought, well, you're joking, aren't you? I mean, he's just been incredible. I was lucky enough to side him a couple of times when he was winning those Pertems, and then stupidly have given him up subsequently, and it cost me fortunes because he keeps winning at massive prices. He was unconsidered by the market again on Saturday. It's ridiculous. As you say, that 8 to 1 looked a paltry figure compared to his in-running price, but just an incredible horse. I think Gordon labelled him a horse of a lifetime, and he's not far off really. Just amazing performance how he's managed to come from the bottom of the straight, looking as if he was going nowhere to win, pulling up.
Yeah, definitely. Marie's Rock, much better than she showed at Cheltenham. I think they're kind of going to kick themselves that they didn't go to the Stayers.
Although she was keen enough at Cheltenham, I don't think she'd have got 3 miles the way that she raced at Cheltenham, to be honest. She settled a lot better on Saturday.
Yeah. Cool. Kate, any of the others kind of performances from Aintree to note? Zenta obviously won the juvenile hurdle in a photo. Famous Clermont was really, really easy winner of the Fox Hunters. Great performance. Yeah, and a few others. Obviously, John Bond won at a short price. 8 to 1. Champion Chase and Ryanair going forward with Bet365 next year. Any of the other performances to note?
Oh my goodness, I would be here all day if I didn't have that. Just as a warning, but Zenta. I mean, it was fascinating. Mark Walsh, just the way he analysed that race post-race when he pulled up and he just said, God, I hit the front however far too soon. He thought, you didn't really, did you? But that's just the level of jockey that he is, where those minute little details he straight away hones in on, and that's what he's concentrating on, rather than just taking all the accolades and all the plaudits post-race. He's straight away saying, gosh, I hit the front too soon there. But that was just a wonderful performance from her to confirm the Triumph hurdle form. Famous Clermont, great to see Will Biddick, the king of point-to-pointing, who's been sort of the trainer, the pre-trainer for Paul Nicholls, the jockey, the champion jockey for however many times, come there with a great win for him, for a proper pointing background with Chris Barber, obviously with his dynasty that he represents. Bill Baxter, didn't expect that. I thought Sammy had... I didn't really understand what Sam Twiston Davis had done with choosing him over Fantasticus, where Fantasticus obviously didn't get into the Grand National. I thought, Bill Baxter, his jumping hasn't been that sound. He's very inexperienced for this, but he could not have jumped those fences any better, so delighted for him. And of course, it was all just incredibly easy for John Bond, despite him getting worked up beforehand, but that's just him.
Yeah, John Bond's time was incredible, really. I think Connections of Calico would be a bit gutted he came down at last. That was a £25,000 payday if he'd stood up just for finishing second. But I think we saw how crucial good ground was to John Bond on Saturday. The fact that he bounced off it, travelled beautifully on it. I just think his wheels spin a little bit on soft ground, and he's just not the horse. So if he came up a good ground champion Chase, I think he could definitely get closer to El Fabiolo. The one horse I fell in love with over the week was Dysart Enos in the Mares National Hunt race. I thought her figures were just unbelievable. I mean, you look at the circuit time compared to Zenta, she was 20-25 lengths quicker, and that's even with the hurdles being taken into account. It was just ridiculous. She's quality. I think Bet365 very wisely 6 to 1 for the Mares Novices Hurdle at the Cheltenham Festival, but I think there's some 10 to 1 in the Village, which might be of interest because she just routed them, and her figures just stand up so well with, even Constitution Hill. I mean, he's obviously just sauntered round, but he was asked to race from the bottom of the straight, but yet she's marginally quicker. It's just they don't bear, comparison really. It's just crazy. So I think she's very, very talented, and it's not like they dawdled around either. The overall time's strong. So I think she's one horse I'm going to take out of that meeting and follow next year.
Yeah, and it looked like it was a strong race on paper as well. You had some really interesting types, and
she routed them, didn't she?
Yeah,
absolutely ran away from them. We've got the trademark Paddy Brennan celebration as well. We saw a few celebrations, didn't we?
Yeah, the Harry Skelton one.
Yeah,
and then Paddy doing his own.
I know punctuation was a boys' race, but you almost felt his jockey was doing the Paddy Brennan as well, wasn't he? So
yeah, absolutely loved it. It was a great meeting on the whole. Lots to obviously then recap. Next segment we'll be talking topics where we're obviously going to talk around the protest and around the positivity that we can show in horse racing. So we can be a bit of a negative bunch sometimes within horse racing.
You're looking at me for that, Steve. The old cynic on the end rather than you two bright-eyed optimists.
But I thought this would be a nice opportunity for us to obviously give the positives of racing. Obviously, the great work of Stand Up for Racing, which was kind of launched. Kevin Blake and Richard Hawes and a few others have obviously done lots in trying to counter all of these protests. I'm going to leave this to the two of you to talk around both the protests and what actually happened, and about the positivity with horse racing. Kate, I'm going to come to you first, from being kind of more within the horse racing, the kind of stable side, to give us that part of it.
Yeah, well, obviously we had it flagged up from quite a way out. I mean, because this whole protest was uncovered, of course, and they had stated their intentions for this protest. So as soon as the images came onto my screen, I was at home watching it like the majority of other people. And my first sort of thought, I just sort of rolled my eyes and thought, oh, here we go. And then it turned into anger for me and frustration, where it was taking a bit more time. And then eventually it kind of boiled down to concern for me more so than anything, because my initial thought from a horse person perspective was, this is not good for these horses. And, sort of in the past, from my own personal experiences, we had single farm payment running in the Grand National a few years back, and anyone who knows racing knows single farm payment was far from straightforward. And the military precision we had to have with even that horse to get him to the Grand National, to get him down to the start without boiling over, to give himself the best chance of performing to his optimal. It literally was military precision. We had him, he was tacked up in the stables. There's a little walkway up in the stable area at Aintree. Had him walked around there with the lad who was leading him up, the travelling head girl, myself and another girl had to go down to the parade ring. As soon as the trumpet went up to sound the start of the national anthem, we had to be on the phone to ring them, because we knew that exact amount of time to walk down from there into the paddock. Paddy Brennan could get the leg up, do half a circuit to go out onto the track. And my main thought when I was watching this was thinking, God, imagine if we had had single farm payment in this year's race. Like, he may not have run on the biggest day of his career. It may have just been all for nothing. That entire horse's career then to build, to be good enough to get a run into the Grand National, could have been destroyed by people then thinking that they're doing right by the horses. And that's where the frustration boils down to me, because you've got 39 runners in there. How many of those are going to be your docile, typical, laid-back type of handicappers that are just going to walk around? And I saw a lot of people arguing online saying, well, what are you talking about? You're talking rubbish. Horses don't have a stopwatch. They don't have a concept of time. And I don't want to be one of these people that patronises those who don't have horse experience, because I, like I say, I'm not from a horsey background. I learned literally on the job with racing. So I never want to take that approach. But when you've worked with horses and racehorses, you know how fine-tuned they are. You know how empathic they are. And people who were at the track, I've heard, were saying that the atmosphere became very tense when that concern embedded into people on the track as well. That will have translated to the horses. Evers Oscar had his tongue tie removed. They loosened the girths off. The horses are confused. There's a state of quiet frenzy at that point, and that's what was frustrating me. But in terms of these protesters, now that the dust has settled and we've calmed down a bit and some of that emotion has been removed, I think racing needs to be on the front foot here. We need to be the good guys. We need to say to them, look, okay, we're on the same team. You think there's welfare issues. We're trying to tell you there's not. We want safety for these horses. We want these horses to, in an ideal world, no horse would ever have a fatal injury. We're striving for the same thing. Come along, you've got your thoughts. Tell us. Like, we're open, we're transparent. Tell us. We can explain to you. And also, you might even be able to help us along the way. I think in racing, we need to be on the front foot as being the good guys now, and being the mature angle as well.
Yeah, definitely. Getting down to the start was the huge issue with these protests of the delay. Even sort of Noble Yates that won the race last year had to be walked out of the parade ring to then get mounted. Like these aren't easy horses, and
no.
There's interesting statistics. Tom Stanley did an interesting one in the 9 renewals of the Grand National since the fence modifications. So 9 runnings, there was 17 fallers at the first 2 fences. There was 8 either falls or unseats this year. Like, it's definitely been a factor.
It must have been, mustn't it? It must have impacted. Now, look, I take on board, people on social media that were saying, well, these horses, there's often razzmatazz, there's bands going, there's all this sort of stuff. You're blaming the protesters for these things having an impact on the race. And I do take that on board. I don't think every horse was affected, but I do think there was a proportion that were. And predominantly, I also think that a lot of the jockeys were probably affected as well. And as Kate was saying, that then translates itself to the horse. I think perhaps where we could have done things slightly different is have a little bit more time down at the start. The horses were rushed out of the prairie, and there was almost like a stopwatch that we've got to get this race off. And I was amazed that it was off before 5:30.
Yeah.
Sometimes anyway there's a delay. It never goes off at 5:15, does it? The National. It's always 5:20, 5:25. And I think they could have just done with 4 or 5 minutes down at the start, walking round, just gathering a breath. Everybody just taking stock really of what had happened. I could understand why they wanted to get it off, because they were probably worried about other protesters appearing, and they thought, crikey, we've got to get this done before we get people on the track. And I think they did a pretty good job, really, the security of the police under difficult circumstances. When you've got over 100 people arrested, over 100 people trying to get into a venue which is so vast as Aintree, it's not an easy task, is it? So I think there were a lot of contributory factors, and perhaps if they had the time again, and with this experience of what happened on Saturday, because you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to happen again. Yeah. It is, unfortunately. This just rears its ugly head year in, year out. And I know that the press room, speaking to a lot of my sort of colleagues in the lead up to the race, there was a general unease that something was going to happen on Saturday afternoon and it wasn't going to go off swimmingly. And unfortunately, we lost Hill 16, which is a terrible, tragedy and really regrettable. And I'm not going to blame that on the protesters, because that can happen at any time. But we've got to bear in mind that with any horse race, there is going to be some risk. We're never going to eliminate risk. Now, do we eliminate risk by a bigger percentage by reducing the field size from 40 to 30? Maybe we have less loose horses, and they were predominantly the problem. Yeah. The trouble with the loose horses is that they keep galloping. It doesn't play into the narrative that horses don't want to run and jump, does it? Because we see so many loose horses in so many Grand Nationals, and they're bombing around, and they're running around with Mr. Coffee in the closing stages of the race, loving it, enjoying themselves. So I don't buy into that theory that the horses just don't want to do it, because they obviously do. They want to race in a pack and they want to do it. But we'll never appease those people who want to stop horse racing. As Lee Moss said, rightly writes in the Racing Post, what you've got to do is try and win over the middle ground and make sure that they're educated. They know that we're doing everything we can to eliminate as much risk as possible. And the differences in the National now from 10 years ago or even 20 years ago are really stark. Really marked. If you watch those old Nationals, you'd wince. They were X-rated, and there were parts of Saturday's race that was X-rated. And I've got to be honest, maybe I'm just becoming an old sentimentalist, but I am finding it a harder race to watch. Look, I can sometimes feel it watching, the repair shop. So I am a little bit of an emo occasionally. Do you know what I mean? But nobody wants to see horses falling and, the horses carried out and, any deaths on our race courses, but it's just not it's never ever going to stop. There is always going to be risk, but it's what's acceptable risk. And, I don't think we should almost have to keep stressing how well cared for these horses are, because that's fact now. That is, you get bad apples in every industry, and will be 1 or 2 trainers that take shortcuts and don't treat the horses as well as others. But I would say 99% if you go into any yard, and you see, stable staff don't do it for the money. They do it for the love of the horse and the therapy that it gives them to be out in the morning riding horses, and the crack and how much they love and enjoy it. They don't do it to get rich. It's not so much a career for them. It's a passion. It's a vocation. It's the way of life. So I won't have it that they get badly cared for, because we know that just as simply isn't true.
Yeah, and the number of trainers that have gone on and said, if anyone wants to come to our yards, at any point to actually see inside a racing yard. People can if they want.
Yeah.
If they actually want to get over this perception of horse racing, the access is there if they want it.
That's it. And again, that's all credit to racing for being transparent. We have nothing to hide.
Right.
But as Sam said, that unfortunately in life, there is always going to be risk. It's mitigated risk, hopefully, and we try and reduce that risk down as much as we possibly can do. But it's sport at the end of the day. Injuries are always going to occur, and no one wants to see any injuries less than us. You know, it really is just one of those risks that we have to take. But if we go to these people and just say, you know, obviously, if they're extremists, we don't want to be entertaining them. But if they truly were there for the animal welfare, which again, a lot of people were very cynical because it looked like a huge attention-seeking ploy, because if they really wanted to stop the race, they would have waited till the race was off. They wouldn't have made this stir then beforehand. But it was a strange timing if they really wanted to stop this race. But if we asked them honestly, is it horse welfare? And they answered yes, say, okay, well, look, we're striving for the same thing. Speak to us. What are the parts of it? Because this industry is never going to disappear. You're living in fantasy land if you think that that's going to happen. But what you can help us with is give us your opinions. You know, go into a yard, tell us what part of the sport you don't like. We can either explain to you by giving you facts because we have nothing to hide, or we're striving to improve certain aspects of racing as well, which you might be able to help us with. And if they refuse that, well, then they answer their own questions that we have over them, that they're just extremists.
I was just going to say, thankfully, we've got enough people in the industry that are very erudite, can speak brilliantly. You know, Kevin Blake, Richard Halls, any number of people that have got a great passion for horse racing and the industry, and they can talk a lot better than I can, and they can relate facts and figures and hopefully disprove some of the myths that these people are purporting.
And it's getting that access onto mainstream shows to be able to do that. If you put any of those, Kevin Blake, Richard Halls, in a debate with one of these activists, it's not even a contest.
Well, you couldn't get a price, could you? You know, Hoyles or Blake would be, 50 on, wouldn't they, to be in a conversation?
They would, but I think anyone could. It's actually having that access, and fair play to the guy, I can't even remember his name, Alex, I think.
Alex Lockwood was it
for actually going into a debate. It's very easy to voice your opinion and not actually have someone else come back to you with the facts, But
this is the issue nowadays, isn't it? Is that we have, and you see it on social media, there's a small group, but they make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not just talking about horse racing. That could be politics, whatever, couldn't it? There's a small group of people, and they get a platform down. You know, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying we've got to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and start making radical changes. I think the way that the executive at Aintree, the BHA, and all the powers that be, that they're looking to keep the race evolving, because in 20 years' time there might not be a race if we were arrogant and we're not prepared to take further steps forward. But we've also got to try and retain what the race is. We've got a lot of long distance handicap chases with 25 runners in. You know, we've got to make sure this is the Grand National. There's a reason why over 600 million people tune in to watch it. There's a reason why 75,000 people go to watch it on a Saturday afternoon in April. It's because it's a very individual race, and they obviously find it reasonable enough to watch, you know.
Definitely. That looks like the perfect place to stop before we then move on to our weekend preview. Before we get into our racing preview, just to let you know that our sponsor Bet365 have an ITV racing price promise. They will not be beaten on price on any horse for all UK and Irish races shown live on ITV Racing. The offer runs from 10 a.m. on the day of the races until 15 minutes before the scheduled off time, and full terms and conditions can be found on the website. This week, this also includes the action from Newmarket in the week for Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, as well as the action on Sunday. Right, we'll preview a couple of races. On Saturday, we have the Scottish National. So Kitty's Light, currently 4-1 favourite to go one better than last year, remarkably off a £3 lower mark, despite going up £8 for the Eider. I mean, he was a certainty, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He may well be for last year's winning connections on then second, at which he was last year as well. Yeah, it's quite the turnaround. How he manages to achieve these things, Christian Williams. But all credit to him. How's Kitty's Light also still a 7-year-old? It still baffles me every time I see this horse's age. I think, what? But yeah, I mean, his run in this race last year was just remarkable. I know the winner also came from further back, but for him to come from further back, to be sticky over his fences, and then to still run the race that he managed to do was quite something. Rightly so, then at the head of the market on all the bases that we've just covered. But the horses that I was interested in from a price play, at least at this stage, Tile Tapper as well as Elvis Mail. Because I always run my trends for these races, and the trends were pointing me to 8 and 9 year olds rated around either the mid 30s or the mid 130s or the mid 140s, hold up formers, 5 runs in the season coming into it, a month since their latest outing, and ideally first or ran well in a handicap chase last time out. Elvis Mail certainly did that, as did Tile Tapper, whose resolution I have doubted in the past, but last time out, his run to finish second in the Midlands National was a really solid effort, coming from further back than ideal. So he's a horse where I still think he has more to offer as a 9-year-old. And Elvis Mail as well, who of course rewrote that wrong of unseating at Cheltenham to the first, which was just gutting for Connections to get back to winning ways in that handicap chase at Kelso last time out, where he won so convincingly. So they would be the two I would be playing just from the price perspective, but of course you've got to respect Kitty's Light.
Yeah, of course. Elvis Mail, currently 16-1 with Bet365. Sam, your thoughts on the race?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the ground is. I think they put 7 or 8 mil on last week. Yeah. So, good to soft the moment, and there doesn't look a lot of rain forecast, which is probably going to stymie my long-term anti-post thought for this, which was Monbeg Genius, who would want some genuine soft ground. Obviously, the form got quite nicely advertised on Saturday, the Ultima form. He was only beaten a couple of lengths by Corach Rambler, was bang there at the death, and it looked very progressive and looked just the right type for this race, to be honest. But he would need some juice in the ground. I spoke to Peter Scudamore this morning, and they're hoping to run Your Own Story from right at the foot of the weights if he can get in. Obviously second to Stumptown, staying on quite strongly at Sandown. Then went and shed his maiden at Wetherby in that long distance chase there before chasing home Equistreamer, hitting the line hard at Haydock last time. So off a lightweight, he looks a potential improver for a stable. They're not in bad nick, are they, at the moment? You look at their form figures and what they managed to achieve. I mean, I was just thinking that there aren't many, if any, northern stables that have bought horses down south in the last 2 or 3 years that have enjoyed the success that they have. They seem just incredibly clever at managing to campaign horses and travel horses. And obviously their runners last week were just unbelievable. They were Hoist Signor, Douglas Torkin was a bit unlucky. Obviously Corach Rambler, Appleway, and even the bump horse ran well, didn't he? Finished 5th or 6th. So yeah, those are my thoughts really. I'd like to see what the ground's going to do for Monbeg Genius. I'll probably have to just hold fire on him and Your Own Story.
Yeah, the Sam Turner Millions has obviously gone on this morning after that phone call, clipped in a couple of points with Bet365 into 10-1 on Your Own Story for the Scottish National. Other race to look at is the Scottish Champion Hurdle. Anna Bonina, currently 5-1 favourite with Bet365 to repeat her victory in the race from last year. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought she ran really well in the county hurdle. Probably not her bag, is it? Proper soft ground like that. Just a bit of spring ground as we saw last year, and in past years have been ideal for her. I think Nemean Lyon's obviously an interesting contender as well. I was impressed with him at Kelso. Looks lightly raced, unexposed type horse that's going to get plenty of weight. But the one I'm going to go with is Colonel Mustard. I think who's a bit of an old favourite of mine. I think he is intending to come over. I messaged Lorna Fowler last night, and they are intending to bring him over. I thought he ran really well. I think I put him up at Kelso last time, and Benson beat him. And he chased home the likes of El Fabiolo over fences this year. And you look back at the county hurdle from last year, 3 lengths behind State Man doesn't look a bad run either. So he deserves to get his head in front. I think he's run a number of good races in these hot handicaps, and at least you're on a guaranteed run. I think the track should suit him, and the ground should be fine. Yeah,
he's around the 6-1 mark. Okay, thoughts?
I think Anna Bonina's going to win this for the 2nd year running, to be honest with you. She actually ticks more of her trends boxes this time around than she did last year. So that should really be all factoring into her favour. She's just a typical mare who comes good in the spring. We know that we have horses at certain times of year, and the ground factors into that as well as the sun and the weather conditions. Mares, though, this time of year, famously, we most notably saw it of Apple's Jade back in the day, but Anna Bonina is certainly one of those. She gets a bit of spring in the air and a bit of sun on her back, and she just comes good. And as Sam said, she ran a really solid race in the county hurdle, I thought, last time out, coming back to her usual form as well. Now, she's running off of a £12 higher mark this time around, but still think that sees her feasibly treated for this race. Again, she's had a good prep to come into it. The hold-up performers do well in this race. Hope she's ridden in that way, and she's had the perfect conditioning with 5 starts this season. So, yeah, have to play it pretty with a straight bat, really, with Anna Vanina.
I'd imagine that Ben Harvey probably used as well, claiming 5. Looks 5 for nothing, doesn't it, really? And, you know, we obviously saw with Fenner Cross last week that, you know, John McConnell's just mustard, isn't he, with this type of horse?
Yeah.
Definitely. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us this week on this episode of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. As always, if you like what you've heard or watched in this or any of our previous episodes, then please leave us a kind review on Apple Podcasts or in the comment section on YouTube. Thanks to both Kate and Sam for joining me on this episode, and we'll be back for the flat in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much.